Welcome everyone to Water Matters Day, our 20th anniversary. I would love to be able to see you all in person, but I'm happy to do this with you today virtually. We are going to be talking about water-sensitive urban landscape design, designing with native habitat in mind. Though in this presentation, you will see Florida-friendly exotic plants that are non-invasive, as well as native plants. But we're going to be discussing about how we can incorporate some of these native plants into our urban design. Let's talk a little bit about some environmental concerns first. This particular map shows you what the population in Florida was like in 2005. The red areas, mostly along the coastlines here, are indicative of where we have our residency. The green areas in dark are conservation lands, which are supposedly permanently protected. And the lighter areas are going to be underdeveloped areas or agricultural areas. Now this slide, with 1,000 people moving to Florida every single day, shows that the population is expected to double by 2060. So what does this mean besides having a lot of people around? It's also going to increase the demand for water. It's going to increase pollution. It's going to decrease the habitats that filter that polluted runoff before it returns to our aquifer. And it's going to continue to fragment our already fragmented habitats. This particular slide from the EPA shows you typical residential water usage. And as you can see, 58.7% of our residential usage goes to the outdoors. So we want to think about how are we going to limit some of that water usage. Any native planting can help, at least in a small way, because natives generally require less water once they are established, and they help to bridge the gaps in our fragmented and overdeveloped habitat and reduce that water usage in the landscape. So we want to start restoring nature one garden at a time. We cannot rely on our lovely park system to provide all of the natural resources for our native and migratory wildlife. It's up to each and every one of us to do a little something in our own yards. Now, trees do have moderating effects for the sun, the wind, and the rain. The temperature in the vicinity of the trees is cooler. We know this. We walk into a park, we go in the woods, 10 degrees, drops right down. The wind speed and direction is affected by trees, and trees help to reduce that stormwater runoff, which is more and more of a problem as climate change affects the density of the rains that we're getting. Trees that are standing alone in the landscape are more of a target in a hurricane. If your trees are planted in a group, they are more wind resistant, and they will change that wind speed and direction. So sometimes trees get a bad rap in hurricanes because people say, well, the trees are gonna fall on my house. But in actuality, if you have groups of trees planted in your landscape away from the house, they're gonna help to mitigate that wind and keep your roof from getting blown off. So urban trees are very important. They're useful and valuable components to our city stormwater infrastructure. And they provide measurable reductions in runoff, volume, and pollutants. They help to control that runoff by reducing the stormwater flow. It also reduces the stress on the city's infrastructure by cooling some of the pavements, and it increases the effectiveness of our stormwater system as they're intercepting some of this rainwater. If you look at some of our urban stormwater challenges, part of the challenge is due to the impervious surfaces that we have when we develop. So if you look at this diagram here to the left, you will find a lot that has natural ground covers on it and trees. The evapotranspiration from the trees is at 40%. There's only 10% runoff. 25% of the water that percolates goes into deep infiltration and helps to replenish our aquifer. 25% goes into shallow infiltration. Now, if you look at this one on the right, where we have 75 to 100% of impervious surfaces, our evapotranspiration drops to 30%, but look what happens to the runoff. Now we're up to 55% of runoff, only 10% in our shallow infiltration, and only 5% going down into the deep infiltration that replenishes our drinking water. So the impervious surfaces limit the infiltration and increase runoff quantity delivered to our receiving waters, leading to degraded waterway conditions. Pollutants are associated with urban areas, sediments, nutrients, heavy metals. All of this impact chemistry and aquatic ecosystems of our receiving waters. Now, trees and their canopy help to reduce that rainfall intensity. We can see some of our friends here all huddled under this glorious big tree that is intercepting the rain and infiltrating it. It is helping it to be able to be stored in the soil. By retaining water in the canopy, even for a short time, the trees can disperse that participation over a longer period of time, which reduces the velocity of the water when it does fall. Now, this is a typical urban street tree design. And if we look at the first side, we see here, one tree out front is providing some pedestrian and human thermal comfort. As we increase the forest habitat for biodiversity, it becomes a more complex urban forest for habitat. As these trees become bigger, we get energy saving benefits from shading the buildings. Now, our native plants help to provide a balanced and healthy ecosystem. They're more adaptable to our climate, and they generally require less water once they're established. Now, all plants are going to have to go through an establishment period, and they are going to need to be watered. So just because it's native doesn't mean you can just stick it in the ground and it's going to do just fine. You still have to water it until it gets established. But once they are established, they generally require less water. We want to try and attract our wildlife back. I mean, I love going to flamingo gardens. I love going to botanical gardens. I love seeing all the wildlife. I also like seeing it in my own yard. And we have fragmented our habitat so much that we need to try and do something to incorporate these wildlife habitats into our urban design. We want to try and maintain an ecological balance and provide some nesting and roosting habitat for our native birds, as well as butterflies and other wildlife. So in this presentation, we'll explore how to incorporate recommended native plant species that I think would be great additions to our urban landscapes. You will see plants in this PowerPoint that are Florida friendly and not native. They are not invasive exotics, and they adapt well to our landscaping here as well. But I'm showing you how we can start to incorporate these native plantings into our landscape. So one of the things that we want to do is try and mimic nature as much as we can. So we want to diversify our landscape. We all know what happened when everybody had ficus hedges for miles. One monoculture that got attacked by the ficus whitefly and the spiraling whiteflies, and we had ourselves a mess. We want to diversify the landscape. You want to create layers and edges, and you want to use numerous species. So one thing gets hit by a disease, hopefully the other things in the landscape will not. Designing a native landscaping, if you want it to be natural, it has to be a meld of art and nature. The styles can be very different. You can have a native landscaping and have it be a formal landscape. You can also have total randomness, but too much of that randomness does not necessarily reflect the order that we see in nature or comfort the human need for uniformity and control, as well as help to comply with your community ordinances, your landscape codes, and your HOA rules. Adopting some traditional guidelines of landscape design will help you to develop a more pleasing landscape that will be appreciated by you and your neighbors. So before you start, it's a good idea to know the ordinances and rules in place in your particular location. Now, this homeowner has a property that was a blank slate, and this is in downtown Fort Lauderdale, a very urban area behind the Galleria Mall. This residential landscape is a beautiful wildlife habitat. the homeowners selected a diverse 98% native plant palette for their newly constructed home. Birds abound, and they have a mating pair of gray fox that are frequent visitors to this little urban oasis. We want to think about being a good neighbor. The front yard landscapes are our public view, and as such, benefit from a more disciplined sense of design and curb appeal, and that will seem more socially acceptable to most of our neighbors, friends, and families. Again, be mindful of your local landscaping restrictions. There is nothing pleasant about a landscape that becomes contentious with the neighbors in the community. I was actually called out to an HOA because somebody had a NatureScape there, and the next door neighbor did not appreciate it. The next door neighbor was actually caught in this neighbor's yard with a ruler measuring whether her lawn was over 3 inches tall. So we do have some of those people around. Now, there was nothing really wrong with her landscape. She was not out of compliance with anything, but I did say to her, you know, give some structure to your landscape. Make the beds look like they're intentional. Make it a little bit more formal. The rule of thumb is if you're up close to the house, it should be more formal. The further you get away from the house, you can begin to make it a more natural, and certainly in the backyard, you can go as wild and crazy as you want. But the landscape should provide examples to our neighbors and friends and family of a pleasantly sustainable and a dynamic way to live. This particular property is an Emerald Award winner, also a Legacy Award winner. This homeowner received an award back in, I think, 1992, and just received a Legacy Award 2 years ago. The property is always impeccably maintained, and many people in Wilton Manor go there for tours. Stratifying your landscape, having different layers is important, especially here in Florida for hurricanes. When you have a canopy, a sub-canopy, or an understory, then your shrub layer, then your herbs and ground covers, you are going to be more hurricane resistant. It is also going to reduce the temperature at ground level. And we know when we have a hurricane coming, everybody runs to Home Depot. Everybody, if they haven't have their shutters up, they're looking for plywood. What do the animals do? Where do the birds go? What does everybody else have to look for? They have to look for shelter as well. And their shelter is going to be in your landscaping. So it's going to help them against predators, and it's going to help them against storms. We want to think about creating contrast and layers. This homeowner was an Emerald Award winner a few years ago, and in her yard, you can see that she has this contrasting of the light and the dark greens. She's got small leaves, she's got palmate, she has tall, she has medium. So she's developed a visually dynamic landscape with contrast with foliage and textures, and also color. So when you're arranging your layering with color and interest, it's going to help you to compose a more rewarding landscape aesthetic. Layering with the canopy trees, understory trees and shrubs and accents and ground covers are going to duplicate what's found in nature. Repeating at least some of these plants in various layers will provide an opportunity to giving more order to your landscape design. So layers in the structure of your landscape will also accommodate flight patterns of birds and allow for shelter, food, and nesting opportunities. This particular house has a good use of line. If any of you are into flower arranging, you know how important line is in your designs. Line is also important in your landscape design. So you want to group plants in flowing lines and sweeps, and this will provide an aesthetic service by moving your eye throughout your landscape. The front layer plants can especially provide a framework on the landscape, like a frame in an art piece, and create a prominent line in the landscape. The line can serve to pull your eye or traffic in the direction that you want to control. Now, this entranceway from the front yard into the backyard of this property has line. It has numerous dark green native plants, and they have incorporated some silvery foliage And you can see how that silvery foliage is just popping in this landscape and with the green. So it's very easy to incorporate all of your native plantings in with a few specimen exotic pieces. You don't have to go completely native, but try and get as much native as you can into your landscape. This is one of my pet peeves, maintaining the landscape. What is that? What are those shrubs? How is that attractive? When you are doing your maintenance in your yard, it's not time to make the donuts. It's not, let's go out there and start sharing everything. If you have a mature landscape, you should be able to have a selective scheduled pruning of a couple of times a year in there. Don't torture yourself and harshly prune the plants and shear them to look like boxes and lollipops painted green. To me, this is totally useless. It's just ugly. And there are so many plants in the landscape, even our ixoras, which are not native, but do provide a lot of pollinated benefit and color in our landscape. You very rarely see them looking nice because somebody comes out and box shears them before they even get a chance to bloom. So we want to think about giving the mature space to the plant. Now, here is a picture of muley grass. And you can see when the landscape is planned and spaced accordingly to allow for that natural growth features of the plant selected, the plants reflect the character of their species, allowing them to flower, fruit, and function as ecological entities. And many typical landscapes, these features are being boxed and pruned away. So this gets a beautiful mauve lavender inflorescence on it in the fall. And then it gets tiny, tiny little seeds. And the migrating birds are coming through then. And the painted buntings absolutely love this. So why would you shear all of that off? Use the benefits of the native plants. Let them get to their mature size. So getting started, do you have a plan? You don't have to go absolutely crazy about having a plan, but I am as guilty as anybody else of finding a plant in a nursery that I want and then tucking it under my arm and walking around the yard and saying, where can I fit it in? And at this point in my landscape, usually I'd have to take something out to fit anything else in. So what we want to do is very easily to get started, start with a layout of what your existing features are in the yard. You know, do you have a path? Do you have a patio? Do you have some existing trees in there already? And then you can start to modify the shapes and start to fill in the details of other trees that you might want to put in, or plants, or specialty features, or viewing areas. Well-placed trees or shrubs that provide food or shelter and water features can allow wildlife viewing from windows, patios, and other important viewing spots in your home. We always have to think about the right plant in the right place. And this, for years, people said, okay, I'll look up and see if I have an overhead line. Well, that's good. Yeah, that's part of it. The other part of it is what's underground. So if you're going to be putting in a large tree in your yard, you want to call 811 first, and you want to have a market so you don't hit your utilities and you don't have your tree roots in areas where you don't want them to be. Light is very important. You want to check what your light is at different times of the day. Is it shaded? Is it full sun? Is it a windy area? You don't want to plant brittle trees in a windy area. Is there exposure to salt spray? The soil and moisture content, is it a high and dry area, or is it low with poor drainage? If you put a Gumbo Limbo in an area with poor drainage, it's going to rot. If you put it up in a high and dry area, it's going to be happy as a clam. So check your power lines and check for compacted soil, because as I said, when the developers come in and they clear cut, they usually scrape off all the native plants and all the native soil. They bring in their fill, they compact it, they put their foundations on, and then they put in the non-native species that grow fast, so they'll look good quick. So is that soil compacted? If you're planting native plants, or some people say, well, native plants should be planted in native soil, but the soil most likely that you have in your urban landscape is not native soil. It's not what you're going to find in our parks. So you may have to augment your soil. Now, in talking about proper plant placement, We don't want to have a bunch of soldiers crammed in up against the front of the house with a military look. My dad was career military, handsome guy. Don't want that in the landscape. So now we have a house, and what you typically will see about a foot away from the foundation, under the underhang there, the overhang, they'll plant all of these plants in a row. There's no space for the plants to grow to their mature size. It inhibits the airflow behind them, so you're going to get mold on your house and mold on your plants, and it makes it hard for you to paint your house. So let's liberate those plants and those soldiers from around the house. Let's move those planting beds out further into the landscape. It's going to be better for the foundation of your house, and it's going to be healthier for your plants. So this combined spacing of the plants appropriately should allow for the natural growth features of the individual species. When the landscape is loosened up and pulled away from the house, it can still effectively soften the structure as well as help in the end goal of reducing the lawn area. The lawn areas are guzzlers for water, fertilizers, and pesticides. So if we can reduce some of that lawn area, let's try and do that. That will help. Think about what the function is. You might need some lawn area. You might need an area for the kids to play. You might need an area for your dogs to run. So there, we're not saying eliminate sod, but think about the function of what you're using your yard for. You want to create activity areas, play areas, entertainment, pathways for circulation. You want to have privacy and screening. This homeowner has a lovely patio here, beautiful screening of native plants, absolutely gorgeous. And the main drag is right out there, and you don't even see it. She has included ground cover shrubs and canopy trees, understories, and a diversity of multiple layers. As far as aesthetics, we want to think about form, texture, and color. Our eye went right to this slide immediately because of the color in it, with the red from the firebush. So the design principles of line and the red is giving your eye that flow. And now we have some repetition also of the trees here. So that's giving the landscape a little bit of rhythm. So this becomes very pleasing to the eye, even though there's only a few elements in it. Composition, repetition, and rhythm. A thematic repetition of the plants is going to provide a little sense of organization to your landscape. You don't need to repeat everything in your landscape, but a couple of the species repeated and pocketed through the landscape is going to give a rhythm to your landscape, and it's going to give a nice flow and a readability. Now this home is in the Rio Vista area, and they did a beautiful job of incorporating some Florida-friendly ground covers in here. This is the perennial peanut. It is not native, but has far less inputs than the sod areas. So they've reduced some of the sod areas this way. They have some mass plantings in here. They have some specimen plantings of thatch palms and some beautiful oaks in here. And they have rows as you go into the back. And here down below, you can see this row in a natural area up in parkland. And this is, an HOA. How beautiful is that, driving down the street and seeing that repetition of those rows? Here we have the clusters and masses of plants together instead of just one plant, and they make a nice show and a grouping. When you're doing your landscape, you don't need to have a really big yard. If you have a small yard, if you have a courtyard, you could even do a container garden. These plants here, think about using plants that are going to appeal to more than one species and one or more life phases. So if you look at this, there are two native passion vines here, the corky stem passion vine and the incense passion vine. There is also the native firebush. Now, if you only had one of these passion vines and the firebush, you would be supplying larval host plants for the zebra longwing, the Gulf fritillary, and the Julia. This corky stem is going to produce these little seeds for the birds. The firebush is going to produce nectar for the adult plants and for the ruby-throated hummingbirds, which love the firebush. And then the firebush produces these little seeds, again for the birds. So with just two of these plants, you are attracting all of these species. And you could even do this in a pot. If you had a big pot, a fire bush, and had some corky stems flowing over the side, some nectar plants, some larval plants, a little public station, you have everything you need to certify your yard right in the pot. So now I'm going to talk about different plants here, and we are on a limited time frame, and I'm going to breeze through these. These are native plants that I think would be great additions to your landscape. You can always come back to this video and you will be able to pause it, so you will be able to go through them. So if I go through too quick, don't get frustrated with me. I'm on a bit of a time constraint here. So I don't know if you've read any of Dr. Doug Talamay's books, but they're absolutely fantastic. And our live oak, which is native to Florida, supports more butterfly and moth caterpillars than any other tree species. This is important food for baby birds. We have lost over 3 billion breeding birds in North America since the 1970s. Part of that is due to the lack of insects, lack of habitat, structures, glass structures and bird strikes, night lighting, feral cats, pesticide use on the insects. All of these things do affect. But even birds that rely primarily on seeds must have protein for their babies when they have their breeds. So they need to go through an awful lot of caterpillars. And I know all of the butterfly people are going, no, I don't need that. But the caterpillars are an important food source. So we want to incorporate our native plants that do provide for those caterpillars. Now, here's the Gumbo Limbo, beautiful local tree. We call it the tourist tree because of its red and peeling bark. When people think about butterfly gardens, they think about those small little nectar and larval host plants and colorful plants and stuff, and that is true. But there are many trees and shrubs that are also larval host plants, and this particular tree is a larval food plant for the dingy purple-winged butterflies. It also provides a nectar source. This prefers a well-drained soil. It is not going to like being in a wet spot. It is a fabulous native plant, but when you see a plant and it says grows rapidly means that the wood on it is not going to be as strong as a wood from a tree that grows more slowly. So if you're thinking right tree, right place, beautiful tree to have in your yard, but not up against your roof line and not where you park your cars under it, because in a storm, these branches are going to tend to rip off. The good part is this particular species has very good compactualization, so it recovers very quickly. So it's a beautiful tree to put in your landscape, but in the right place. So you can go to the NatureScape website, and there is a brochure on there called Gone with the Windstorm, and it will help you on selecting the right plants for hurricanes. The sea grape is a very big tree. It gets edible fruits on it for the wildlife, and also humans make jelly out of it. Extremely salt tolerant and drought tolerant. If you're in the beachy areas, this is a great coastal plant to use. The wild tamarind is one of my favorites. You do need space for it because it's going to go 50 to 60 feet. It has these tiny little fragrant flowers from February to September, a beautiful attractive bark and a weeping open canopy, highly salt tolerant, highly drought tolerant. It is a larval food source for the cassia blue and the large orange sulfur butterflies. It also provides nesting for birds. In addition, remember I told you about the little seeds. These get the little seeds on them. So the painted buntings, the warblers, the nutcatchers, they're going to all want this particular tree. This false mastic, if you've got a big space and you're looking for some nice big shade trees out there, it has a moderate growth rate, a strong wood, 60 feet high, a broad canopy, very significant food source for wildlife. The Willow Bustick is an accent tree. It will grow 20 to 30 foot high, but it's not quite as wide. Has these white creamy flowers on it all year, and a nectar plant for many of the butterflies. This Fiddlewood tree, I planted 3 of them out at Markham Park when my son passed away. It's a fantastic tree for birds, and the bird garden is close by. These 3 trees were on the truck, and they were not offloaded yet, and the birds were already on the truck, pecking away at the seeds at that time that were ripe. It has fragrant flowers, a beautiful white drupe, and it's drought and salt tolerant. The female plants bear berries year round. They're very useful to wildlife. The Geiger tree, if you're looking for something showy, this gets a nice reddish orange flower on it, attracts our hummingbirds, and it flowers year round. And this is a moderate sized tree. So if you have a smaller yard, it only grows to 20 feet. We could fit that one in. The pigeon plum is going to get 25 to 35 feet. Look at the fruits on it. These are dark purple fruits. This is what you want for your wildlife. This is what you want for the birds and other wildlife coming through. I love these satin leaves. I used to live in the Washington, D.C. area for a while where the magnolias are plentiful. They have that dark green glossy leaf and that underside that looks like suede. They're just beautiful, but those trees have stiff leaves. These trees, when the wind blows and those leaves kind of flutter in it, it's absolutely stunning. Beautiful tree. They do like an area that's a little bit more moist. So if you have an area that stays more damp, it will be happy as a clam there. If it's in a drier area, you're going to need to give it more irrigation, especially when you're first getting it established. It has tiny little flowers that attract insects, and in turn, those insects attract the warblers and the orioles. The black ironwood is the densest of all woods native to South Florida. It is very slow growing, small to medium tree. Again, slow growth, denser wood. Full sun to light shade, beautiful dark green foliage, and the fruits attract birds. The cinnacord is lovely if you've got a small yard, 15 to 20 feet, full sun, pretty showy yellow flower in the spring and the summer, critically imperiled in South Florida. When we have our Water Matters Day tree giveaways, I try and include a lot of these native plants, especially any critically imperiled ones that I can find. So when we go online with Eventbrite in May for our Water Matters Day tree giveaway, be sure you check out what's available. We always try and include some of these plants that are hard to get for the average homeowner. So the bay cedars, if you're down by the ocean, great tree. It can be a small shrub, it can be a tree, it has these yellow flowers on it, and it's also a host plant for the Marshall scrub hair streak and the mallow hair streaks. The Bahama strongbark, I just adore this tree. It's got such a weeping effect to it. It's so delicate looking. It has these semi-showy white flowers year round. It provides food and cover for wildlife. The hummingbirds like it. Is listed as endangered in the state of Florida. If you have the opportunity to put back some of these things that we're losing, why not put them back? Also on our Water Matters Day website, you'll see some of the winners of the Emerald Awards from this year. There's some videos on there. There's one homeowner who did a beautiful thing in her backyard. She has some trellises there, and she had planted a Bahama strongbark on either side of that trellis, and then had them draping over the trellis. I had never seen it done that way. It was very creative and quite lovely. The coral bean, great for hummingbirds, great as a nectar source, kind of scraggly looking thing actually as a tree. I wouldn't put it out by itself, you know, as an accent. But again, when you're doing your layering and your different layers, incorporate this in with your other plants, because this is a great nectar plant for hummingbirds and butterflies. The torchwood is almost impossible to find. I did locate some this year, and I'm hoping to have them for the tree giveaway in May, if they're still available. They are a medium-sized tree. They're very rarely larger than a bushy shrub, but again, in Florida, you never know. Stuff in the right spot can get pretty big. The thing that's important about this tree is it's one of the only 2 food plants for the endangered shaw swallowtail butterfly. The other food plant for them is citrus. And we have lost over 60% of our citrus in Florida due to citrus greening and citrus canker. So that is a huge loss for this already endangered butterfly. So if you have the opportunity to plant this tree in your yard or a wild lime in your yard, please do so as to help our endangered butterflies. The dehoon harley, we see right away why the birds are going to like this. Lots of red berries, very drought tolerant, but it prefers moist areas. If you have a low area in your yard, if you have a stormwater retention pond in your yard or a canal that you might want to put something down by where it's more wet, this will do well there. The red mulberry is one of the few native fruit trees to Florida. It's a beautiful tree. It'll get 15 feet tall and 15 feet wide. It does like the full sun because it is producing fruit. So just like a vegetable garden, you would want more. The berries on it taste like blackberries, and I absolutely love them. I had one of these trees before a hurricane took it out, and when it was smaller, I would put a sheet under the tree and just shake the stem, the trunk of the tree, and all the berries would fall down. And when I got 4 cups, I made the most delicious pies. But I did share some of them with the birds. But thinking about the right plant in the right place, you know what it's like when you eat blackberries. You do not want to plant this where it's going to stain your roof or your driveways or your walkways. So plant it out into the landscape, out into the yard fine, not where you're going to have any pavements or you will be cursing me. The bald cypress, again, great for around the water areas, not something that I would recommend in a lawn because they do show, send up those cypress knees and you don't want to be mowing around those and bumping into those. They prefer the moist areas, but they will adapt to less water. The seed cones are used by the gray squirrels, the ducks, and the sandhill cranes. Pond apples, again, around the waterway. If you go to the NatureScape website, we do have a brochure on there called Landscaping on the Edge, and you can download it right off of the site, and it will give you all kinds of choices for planting around those stormwater retention ponds. The mercene, 10 to 15 feet, sometimes 30 feet in South Florida. Again, moist to seasonally wet, well-drained and poorly drained soils. It's pretty much adaptable, and it flowers on different plants with male and female. If you have a spot for milkweed, try and get the native milkweeds. We have several NatureScape nurseries around Broward County that are carrying more of the native plants. So they're a little harder to find, but you can find them. You can also plant the tropicals. There are some controversies over that. Some people don't like the tropicals being planted. That's primarily more in northern Florida and above because a lot of those monarchs are migrating and they're susceptible to disease. But we do have a resident population of monarch butterflies as well. So I do incorporate them in my own garden. And I know a lot of people are cringing. The Sable Palm gets a bad rap because they're around and they're native and they're used a lot, but they have the most hurricane resistant of all the palms. So if you're looking for palms up close to your house, this is going to be your best selection. It's huge in wildlife and ecology. It provides a significant food source and cover for wildlife. It's a larval host plant for the monk skippers. It's a nectar plant. It also attracts birds and other animals that eat the fruits. This is a Florida thatch palm. I actually took this picture in our parking garage here at Government Center. I love them. They're quite beautiful. They're listed as endangered by the state of Florida. So why not plant a native plant that doesn't require a lot of fertilizer, that's listed as endangered, instead of putting those horrible foxtail palms in that you have to fertilize and fertilize and fertilize and put all of those pollutants back into our aquifer. Go with something native. It is also a larval food plant for the monk skipper butterfly. Now, this is an Everglades palm. That should tell you right away it's going to want wet or mucky soils. So if you have a wet area, this would be something that you could put in your yard. The stoppers are all wonderful. The Simpson stoppers, the red stoppers, the white stoppers. This is a Simpson stopper. It has fragrant blooms intermittently all year long. It's great for pollinators. It gets orange and red berries that attract the birds. It's a win-win. It can be 10 foot tall as a shrub or a small tree. You can certainly incorporate this into your landscape. I can't say enough about the native firebush. Unfortunately, when you go to the nurseries, Hamelia patens is Hamelia patens. It's whether it's native or it's non-native. A red flag is if they say it's compactor or if it's dwarf or it's a hybrid. then it's not going to be the native. So ask when you're there if it's native. Some nursery growers are crazy and say, well, it's native to somewhere, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the Florida native, which has more red veins in it, or more red on it. It's more salt tolerant. The leaf is a little fuzzier. The berries attract the birds. The blooms attract the hummingbirds and the butterflies. It's easily incorporated into any landscape. This is the Lignum vitae. It's very expensive. We have offered them for Water Matters Day before. It's a specimen shrub or a small tree. It only grows to 8 to 20 feet in height, and it has a very slow growth rate, which is why it's so expensive for the nursery growers to grow. This picture was taken at a beautiful specimen. If you're down by the Museum of Science and Discovery, go across the street to the DDA Plaza. I took this picture there. It is a larval host plant for the lysine butterflies, nectar plant for butterflies and bees, and beautiful showy blue flowers. The Jamaican Caper, a lovely little shrub. I love the flowers on this. It reminds me of the little fascinators they wear in England, or orchids. It comes out white and showy in the spring and then turns to a pinkish. And it's a larval host plant for the Florida white butterflies. So a win-win. I've really gotten to like this particular plant, this Locust Berry. I was with the Native Plant Society last night and brought some along. This one has beautiful showy clusters of white and pink flowers that turn to dark red. It's a small tree or a large shrub. It also is a larval host plant for the Florida duskingwing and nectar plant for the butterflies, and provides seeds and fruit for birds. So resources, of course, you can go to IRC Natives for Your Neighborhood, the regionalconservation.org. Check that site out. They have all kinds of information on native plants. And also the Florida Native Plant Society, county.org. The National Wildlife Federation, NWF.org, our partner. We have over 5,000 NatureScapes in Broward County. If you certify with National Wildlife Federation, you automatically become a NatureScape, and I will give you a sign for your yard that you can put up and brag about, so your neighbors will learn about all the things that you're doing for our environment and hopefully do the same thing themselves. You can go to our NatureScape Broward site, so broward.org/NatureScape. I do have the videos up now on the Emerald Awards winners for this year, so you can view those. You do have to scroll down. And of course, the University of Florida, Florida Friendly Landscaping. As I say, you don't need to have native plants to be Florida friendly, but the concepts for maintenance and best management practices are there, and also landscape design. So all of those will be resources for you. Thank you for joining me today. We are going to go live on Facebook and have a question and answer session on Tuesday, March 15th at 12:30. So if you come back then, we'll be able to answer your questions, and it gives you a little time to try and stump me. So we hope that you enjoyed the presentation. We hope that you're enjoying Water Matters Month and competing for some of the fabulous prizes that are available on our scavenger hunt. And I hope you all have a tremendous day.